Bulavinaka and good afternoon, everyone. I am Naushad Yaqub, and I'm the program officer with the Japan International Cooperation Agency here in Fiji. And I would be the master of ceremony for today. I'm very glad to see that we have got few numbers coming in person, and also we've got about 20 people who have joined us virtually for this special seminar on Japan's approach to international cooperation. Just a bit of background on how this seminar all came about is there has been a lot of talk recently around the Pacific Island leaders through the Pacific Islands Forum, where there's a lot of talk about donor agencies and development partners who are trying to work with the Pacific Island countries to move forward with some pressing issues. So one of JICA's, known as the JICA's Development Studies Program, also known as JICA Chair, this particular seminar sort of leads into that and trying to see what Japan's approach is towards international cooperation. So this particular seminar is actually a series of about 15 different chapters, and it is more linked around politics, economics, public administration, and law, and trying to provide that support and human development capacity to Pacific Islanders in these fields through different programs under the Japanese studies. This seminar focuses on the official development assistance that was formalized in 1960 and takes a different approach in trying to support the policies of the development countries as articulated in the ODA Charter of 2003. So what we intend to do is to share lessons learned through Japan's modernization and develop cooperation, and to learn how Japan can lead development studies globally and thereby contribute to sustainable development. So before introducing the speakers, I would like to kindly share some housekeeping rules, especially for those who are joining us virtually. Please remain or keep your mic and your videos mic on mute, and please shut down your videos and cameras so we have better bandwidth and we can reach more people clearly and orderly. For your questions, please you can write your questions in the chat as we go along, and all the questions will be answered after the speaker, which is Professor Kato, and then your questions will be answered. For the audience that are present here, please kindly raise your hands, and we have ushers around here who would be able to take your questions, and then Professor Kato would kindly respond to your questions as well. If in any instances we cannot provide you with the right solution or answer your questions, please drop us an email is on the flyer for the seminar, and we will try and get back to you with the best solutions and answers that we can. For today's seminar, we will have 3 speakers. The first speaker is Ms. Mayumi Ameke. Then we will have Professor Kato, who will be joining us from Niigata, Japan. And then we will have Dr. Pauna, DVC USP, who would be giving closing remarks. I would like to introduce Ms. Ameke Mayumi Ameke. She's the resident rep of JICA Fiji office and manages 9 different offices in the Pacific region: Fiji, Kiribati, Nauru, Cook Islands, Tuvalu, Niue, Samoa, Tonga, and Yes. And Ms. Sameke has been in Fiji for the past 18 months. And she is the second female resident representative to be present in Fiji. I would like to welcome Ms. Sameke to give her opening remarks. Thank you.
Dr. Julio Paunga, Deputy Vice Chancellor and Vice President, University of South Pacific, and all the participants joining in person and virtually. Guravinaka and good afternoon. On behalf of Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to USP, especially International Office, and the team from I.T.S Center in collaborating with us for today's program. I also thank everyone joining this program, not only in Fiji, but also from the countries in the Pacific and Japan. JICA is an implementing agency of Japan's official development assistance and is supporting socio-economic development with such schemes as technical cooperation, grants, and concessional loans in about 150 countries. In the Pacific, JICA has offices in 10 countries and is offering a wide range of cooperation to overcome challenges in the region. One example of JICA's cooperation for USP is today's venue here, USP Japan Pacific ICT Center. This center was established by grant aid and opened in 2011. And JICA also implemented technical cooperation projects for IT capacity building. This special seminar is a part of JICA's program for Japanese studies, so-called JICA Chair. Japan is one of the non-Western countries that emerged economically and democratically while preserving a culture and a tradition. Japan also has extensive experience of development cooperation through official development assistance. JICA Chair provides history, experiences, and lessons learned through Japanese modernization and development cooperation. This program is made possible in collaboration with leading universities both in Japan and overseas. Activities of JICA Chair are summarized into two types. One is a short-term or sporadic lectures on Japanese studies like today's seminar. Another is long-term commitments to establish research and educational programs on Japanese studies in collaboration with leading universities in partner countries. So far, there are about 50 countries where JICA Chair has been conducted. In Japan, programs similar to JICA Chair are ongoing, and the scholars of JICA scholarship programs have the opportunities to learn about Japan's development in the modern era and its history beyond the boundaries of the university that the scholars are studying at. International University of Japan, where today's lecturer, Professor Kato, is teaching, is a strong collaborator of the program and has accepted a number of JICA scholars. JICA is now accepting applications for enrollment next year. The scholars are expected to contribute to appropriate policy decision and its implementation for tackling development issues in respective fields of their home countries after the completion of their program. So if you are interested in applying, please contact JICA office nearest to you. Today's lecture is today's lecture is about the Japanese approach to international cooperation. Japan is now the largest bilateral development partner in Fiji, but Japan used to be the recipient of development assistance from overseas itself. Professor Kato will share with us about the history, experiences, characteristics, and lessons learned of Japan's development cooperation. I hope that you will enjoy his lecture. Binaka Bakalebu, thank you very much.
Thank you, Amike-san, for giving the brief and background about JICA and what this seminar is all about. Now I would like to introduce the guest speaker for today, Professor Kato. Professor Hiroshi Kato is Vice President and Professor at the Graduate School of International Relations, the International University of Japan. In 1978, Professor Kato joined JICA after graduating from the Faculty of Letters, University of Tokyo, majoring in Asian history. In 1988, he attained a master's degree in public administration from the John F. Kennedy School at Harvard University. While working for JICA, Professor Kato served at various positions, including the Planning Department, Asian Department, and the JICA Research Institute. In the last 6 years of his service at JICA between 2013 and 2019, he was Senior Vice President. He subsequently joined International University of Japan in 2019 and was appointed the university's Vice President in 2021. Professor Kato has also co-edited Japan's official development assistance for an aid and post-2015 agenda and author of several publications on Japan's official development assistance. I would like to give this opportunity to Professor Kato, connecting from Niigata, Japan, to begin this special seminar on Japan's approach to international cooperation. Thank you. Professor Kato, please.
Thank you, Mr. MC. And hello, everyone. A warm greeting from Niigata, Japan. I'm very happy and thrilled to be given this opportunity to talk about Japan's official development assistance. And before I start my presentation, I'd like to thank Chief Resident Representative Maike and the Dr. Vice Chancellor of the University of South Pacific for giving me this opportunity. Now let me start my presentation. Do you see it now? I hope you.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, is everything fine? All right. Okay, thank you. Mr. MC has already talked about myself, so I would like to skip this slide. But anyway, I've been working for JICA. So what I'm going to talk about today is what I learned from my on-the-ground experiences working for JICA at concerning various JICA projects. And this is what we are going to cover in today's seminar. I would like to start with a brief discussion on what ODA is, assuming that not everybody is familiar with this idea. And then I'll talk about the Japanese approach to ODA, or international cooperation in general, comparing it with those of other actors, such as European countries, USA, and international organizations. And we will talk about how some of the principles of Japan's ODA are actually applied when Japan and South Pacific countries collaborate with each other. This is number two. And thirdly, I would like to extend our discussion to the historical background of Japanese development. And I'd like to try to explain why Japan does, in terms of its ODA, why it does what it does in terms of its ODA. And at the end of my presentation, I'd like to open the floor for questions and answers. But uh, I'd like to invite your active interventions even during my presentation. So I'll perhaps invite you to raise questions or comments in some during some intermissions in my presentation. Okay, that is the idea. And about this PowerPoint point slide, if you want, I can share this slide later. I haven't shared this slide beforehand, but if you are interested, you can have it later through JICA Fizzy Office. Okay, now let's talk about ODA or international cooperation in general. Let me clarify the meaning of some of the words that I'm going to use frequently in this presentation. International cooperation or foreign aid or foreign assistance is a very broad term that refers to any act of cooperation crossing national borders. So international cooperation is a very broad word. And ODA, the subject of today's presentation, is part of um, the broad concept of international cooperation or foreign aid or foreign assistance. ODA uh, has three requirements in order for any act of cooperation to be classified as ODA. One is it has to be official. That means the activity should be sponsored and implemented by some actor in the public sector, official assistance. And the second qualification that has to be satisfied is that it has to aim at the development of the partner country, socio-economic development. In this case, military cooperation is not included in the category of official development assistance. And third keyword is assistance. And this assistance means that any act of cooperation is done in a favorable condition than is normally practiced in the market. To put it, to make some additional clarification to these definitions, ODA does not include that is not something that is not official. So bank loans provided by commercial banks are not categorized as ODA because they are private and not official. And secondly, as I said, military aid is not excluded from the category of ODA because it is not necessarily aimed at the development of the partner countries. And thirdly, assistance. By the word assistance, we exclude um, commercial transactions. So we provide loans. Japan provides loans within its ODA, but it means the conditions of such loans are much more favorable than those loans provided in the market by commercial banks. Okay, so these are the three definitions or conditions that have to be satisfied for any act to be categorized as ODA. This is a kind of abstract in explanation. So let us visualize what kind of things are being done in the framework of ODA. Oh yeah, but anyway, so foreign aid is a term used broadly to refer to ODA and private aid and military aid. Okay, um, so these are the major instruments used in ODA. As I said, loans can be part of ODA if its conditions are more favorable than market conditions. And grants are a gift from one country to another. So the recipient countries don't have to repay the um, the gift. And we also have technical cooperation, and which is further subdivided into several instruments, such as experts, training, emergency relief, volunteers, etc., etc. Let's have a quick look at these. Um, First, loans. Fortunately or unfortunately, we don't provide a lot of loans to South Pacific Island countries because loans are usually used for gigantic infrastructure development projects. But for some countries, like in the big countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, India, Vietnam, well, we do provide loans primarily for the development of economic infrastructure, such as urban transport, bridges, power plants, and port facilities, etc., etc. And another type of financial aid is grants. That means the recipient countries don't have to repay. And usually, grants are of a much smaller scale than loans, and they are used for the purposes of constructing social infrastructure. By social infrastructure, I mean primary schools, dispensaries, water facilities, etc., etc. And in some cases, exceptional cases, we use grants for the development of economic infrastructure, such as bridges, as shown in this slide. This is possible when the recipient country is rather poor and cannot afford to develop necessary infrastructure on its own resources, with its own resources. But usually, grants are used for social or facilities or educational facilities. And technical cooperation can be implemented in a variety of ways. One is to send experts, Japanese experts, to work with their counterparts in the partner countries. And also receive students or government officials primarily for extended period of time, either for a master's level study program or a PhD program. And we have a program called the Pacific Leads, specifically designed for the leaders of the Pacific Island countries. And we also have volunteers as an important part of our ODA program. And some of the countries that you are from might have be collaborating with Japanese volunteers. And they can be either young volunteers or more experienced, aged senior volunteers. We do also collaborate with NGOs, and I think it has been implemented in Fiji as well. And we also partner with private sector, and I mean corporations. And very importantly, we encourage the South cooperation or cooperation among developing countries. And this subject is very important, particularly in the context of the development of Southern Pacific Island countries. So we may spend some time on this issue later. And by the way, this is a picture of me attending an international conference in 2013, about 8 years ago or 9 years ago, much younger than I am now. Okay, now this is the outline of official development assistance. And let's stop here for the moment and reflect on the possible impacts of ODA. Um, you know, uh, Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, has been the continent which has been attracting the largest amount of ODA from the donor countries and international organizations for the last 5, 6 decades. But they are not very satisfied with the outcome of the ODA that they have received. This lady, who is a Zambian economist, published a book titled Dead Aid. And its subtitle says, Why Aid is Not Working and How There is a Better Way for Africa. Apparently, African citizens and many government officials are not entirely satisfied with the way foreign aid has been provided. And maybe they can, and they know quite a lot about the economic performance, the difference of the economic performance between sub-Saharan African countries and Southeast Asian countries. As you can see, the red line shows the per capita GDP of Southeast Asian countries, whereas the blue line shows the per capita GDP of sub-Saharan African countries. So you can clearly see from this graph that uh, up until the middle of the 1980s, the two continents were performing almost equally. But after that, there became a sharp discrepancy between the performances of these two continents. While the Southeast Asian countries started to grow very rapidly and steadily, African sub-Saharan African continent remained rather stagnant. And they know that Africa has been the largest receiver of foreign aid for a number of decades. So they're not entirely satisfied with the performance of official development assistance, right? And if you stop and think about it, yeah, actually, foreign aid can be ineffective or even harmful under certain circumstances. In my view, aid is ineffective when it is, of course, wasted, right? By careless planning or poor implementation or even by corrupt leaders. And foreign aid can be even harmful under certain conditions. And the first condition that comes to my mind is that when it undermines the recipient country's public and private capabilities and initiatives. Too much aid discourages the self-help effort of the recipient countries, don't you think? For example, if parents uh, give too much aid to their children, the children might end up being a spoiled children. So too much aid, too much support can sometimes be harmful. And if external actors say tell the partner countries, recipient countries to do this and that, this will discourage the initiative of the recipient country governments and therefore can be detrimental, right? And of course, if too much acts of charity continues in a country, of course, the local capabilities will be undermined and the incentives to stand on their own feet will be weakened in the aid receiving countries, don't you think? So aid can be a very good thing, but can also be a very harmful thing under certain circumstances when we need to be very careful about how to use foreign aid, effectively and wisely. I hope I'm making myself clear. Now, And the final, maybe disadvantage of foreign aid is that it can breed corruption. If the government is very corrupt, well, the aid money can be put into the pockets of the corrupt leaders, and it will be very, very harmful to the society. Okay, so far we have talked about what is ODA, what is international cooperation, and what are the requirements for any act to be classified as ODA. And finally, I talked about the possible negative impacts that foreign aid could bring under certain circumstances. The second topic of my talk is Japan's approach to foreign aid and official development assistance. Um, First of all, I'd like to emphasize that not all donors are the same or even similar. Different donors have different values and different principles, and they do different things. For example, in my understanding, European donors tend to see uh, foreign aid as an act of charity. This is my personal interpretation, and I may be wrong, but I have discussed this matter with a number of friends, and many of my friends have more or less agreed. Well, there is certain tendency among the European donors to see aid as an act of charity. Um, they have to do something for the benefit of the disadvantaged people in disadvantaged countries. So they see it as an act of charity. And as a result, they have a tendency to emphasize the importance of social sector, such as primary education, water, primary health, etc., etc. And they are not very much concerned about the long-term growth of partner countries. This is my interpretation about the European philosophy of foreign aid. Then what about international organizations such as the World Bank and IMF? Though IMF is not an aid agency, let's, for the sake of argument, let's categorize them together, World Bank and IMF. In my view, they have a tendency to rely on primarily on the orthodox economics discourse or discipline called the neoclassical economics. If you're not economist, you may not be familiar with the word neoclassical economics, but basically, simply stated, it is a set of beliefs that market is the uh, better mechanism than government. So, in order for a country's economy to go smoothly and to develop, government interventions have to be minimized and let the market take care of itself. So they are a strong believer of this neoclassical economic doctrines and tend to advise the partner countries to apply these principles to their economies. And since the World Bank and IMF are such powerful institutions, and they firmly believe in the validity of their economic doctrine, in my observation, they have tended to be rather interventionist. That means telling the recipient governments and partner governments to do this and do that according to the recipe prescribed by the World Bank and IMF economists. So these are, again, let me tell you, these are my personal observations and not necessarily, I may be wrong. You can challenge me later. But anyway, so compared to these donors, what are the characteristics of Japan's foreign aid? That is the question that we're going to address now. There are a number of characteristics that make Japan's ODA different from that of other organizations. But for today's lecture's purpose, I have summarized the main points in three. principles. One is the emphasis on the importance of supporting the self-help effort of the partner countries. That means Japan supports the partner countries in such a way that the partner countries someday can stand on their own feet, economically independent, not dependent heavily on foreign aid. So, in other words, Japanese foreign aid has been trying to let the recipient countries to graduate from the state of aid receiving countries. And secondly, um, I'd like to highlight that the Japanese foreign aid is um, very much emphasizing the importance of human resource development, education, and human resource development in general. I would say that Japanese aid practitioners, including Chief Representative Amaike, are obsessed with the idea of the importance of human resource development. And thirdly, in the context of South Pacific island countries, this point is worth emphasizing, and that is Japan has been a strong promoter of South-South cooperation or cooperation among developing countries. This means that we emphasize the importance of taking advantage of the knowledge that are available locally, indigenous knowledge. So I'd like to talk each one of these in the coming 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, now let's have a look at the cooperation between USP and JICA and whether these principles have actually been applied in our cooperation between USP and JICA. This is the list of major projects that have been implemented in the framework of USP Japan collaboration. For the grants, Japan has provided some marine studies facilities and also facilities for the upgrading of USP net communication system and also Information and Communication Technology Center. As I said, these are provided as grants, so USP or Fijian government don't have to repay the costs, right? So the grants. And in tandem with these grant aid projects, JICA has been implementing various technical cooperation projects, and that was already outlined by Chief Representative Amaike in her introductory remarks. But to be more specific, excuse me, JICA has constructed ICT's capacity building cooperation, has implemented ICT's capacity building technical cooperation project, and another one for ICT for Human Development, Human Security Project, and another project, Pacific Islands Capacity Enhancement for Achieving SDG number 14. And one characteristic that stands out is that we use grants and technical cooperation in combination. We don't see grants simply as gifts and which you can use at your own pace. We provide facilities so that eventually those facilities will be used effectively for the capacity development of human resources. So we usually provide grants and technical cooperation together so that these two types of activities will produce synergetic um, impacts. That means 1 plus 1 is not merely 2, but 1 plus 1 is equal to 3 or 4 or 5. And we combined with this, we also have the projects collaborating with NGOs And we also have sent individual experts and some volunteers working together. So, what one message that I'd like you to take away by looking at this slide is that Japanese foreign aid has a lot of emphasis on human resource development, and even a facility development is aimed at be used for the human resource development. And what about the project? Another project is J-PRISM, which stands for Japan Cooperation for the Promotion of Regional Initiative on Solid Waste Management in South Pacific Island countries, J-PRISM. It is a project about the improvement of this waste management in Southern Pacific Island countries. And it is a very unique project in that it encourages collaboration among the member countries and even knowledge creation that results from the interaction of the member countries. In this frame, different countries are treated differently. And actually, some of the countries that have good practices are encouraged to share their experiences with other partner countries of the J-PRISM initiative. So it is, in a sense, a typical South-South cooperation project in which knowledge sharing, knowledge creation is very much encouraged. Okay. So all in all, let me summarize how I see Japanese ODA to the South Pacific Island countries. It is certainly aimed at the self-help support. We don't want to remain dependent on foreign aid forever. Of course, you have to stand on your own, and we are help you to develop your own capabilities. And secondly, emphasis on education and human resource development. And thirdly, we encourage South-South cooperation or the importance of indigenous knowledge. Okay. So do you have any questions or comments so far? Maybe I think it's a good idea to stop here for a moment and see if you have any questions or comments. Mr. MC, will you encourage the participants to raise their hands? Do you have any questions? No? Okay, Patrick-san.
Professor Kato, thank you for allowing for a little break here. I think we'll give maybe a minute for the audience here if they have any questions, and they would ask Professor Kato about what he's talked about so far.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I may go on? Okay. Now,
yes, there is a question here in the audience.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Professor Kato. I have a question. In your presentation, you talked about how aid creates corruption within governments. What is maybe JICA's or maybe the Japanese government's initiative, or what do you have in place to ensure that the grants that you're giving do not create these corruptions within the partner governments that you're working with? What are some initiatives, or how do you monitor your grants? Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you very much. That's a very important question. Well, this subject deserves a lengthy discussion. So I'll try to answer your question very um, briefly, okay, in a summarized manner. I believe Japan has created a system meticulously so that no act of corruption can be implemented in the process of in the whole project cycle, from the initiation of the project and the design process and the implementation process. There are various phases of project implementation, but my short answer is that Japan has created a system where no acts of corruption uh, are possible. For example, when we provide a grant aid, actually, we don't, Japanese government or JICA doesn't give money to the recipient country governments. Yes, we create a bank account where the money for the project is deposited, but actually the recipient country government doesn't have the authority to use it as they like. You know, the money deposited in the bank account of the government for the project is usable only when the use is authorized by a designated consultant or JICA. So JICA and the designated consultants make sure that the construction work is implemented properly, and all the projects have been implemented according to the specifications, etc. Only after these checks are made can an payment be made to the contractors or any other parties concerned. So, in a nutshell, we have created a very particular, meticulous system through which, resources are not wasted or embezzled in the process of implementation. This is a very short answer, and if you are interested more, maybe you could approach our affinity office or the nearest office in your country. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Professor Kato, for explaining that query. We have, I'll give a chance to one of the questions from the virtual. I think Patrick Bauer had asked a question, and Professor Kato, I think you can see this in the tab called Q&A.
Okay.
You'd be able to see the question that has been raised by someone attending this virtually. Patrick Bauer.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Two questions or requests on the chat box, in the chat box. And the first is emphasis on South cooperation. The request is he or she wants to hear more about Japan's emphasis on South cooperation. Um, so first of all, you now understand what South cooperation means, or SSC. It is cooperation among developing countries. And Japan has been a strong advocate of SSC in the early days of its foreign assistance. Actually, it started its first SSEC, South-South Cooperation Project, in the middle of the 1970s. And the advantage of SSC is that, it encourages the collaboration among the countries in the region, in this case, the South Pacific region, but, in other areas like the Caribbean island nations, they also promote South-South cooperation, or countries in the African continent, they encourage cooperation among them as part of their SSC initiative. And uh, they create a strong sense of partnerships among the countries in the region. and the challenges that they are facing are oftentimes similar. So one country's challenges, one country's solutions can be applied, very easily in other countries having similar conditions. But knowledge and technology coming from the north may not always be applicable to the context of a certain partner country because the contexts are so different. You cannot simply adopt knowledge and technologies from the very advanced countries in your country. So, in terms of the knowledge and skills required, it is a better idea than simply trying to transfer knowledge and technologies from the northern countries. So from that perspective, Japan has been a strong advocate of South-South cooperation, and particularly in an area like the South Pacific, where there are many countries, many of them are small, and facing similar challenges and problems. South-South cooperation can be a very effective tool. That is why we have been promoting South-South cooperation. Well, we'll talk about this maybe more later. And the second request is, could you talk a little bit about JICA's partnership with other international donors, such as USAID and Ministry of DFAT? I think it is a UK system, right? Yeah. Um, yes, we do collaborate with other donors, and we periodically have discussions at the headquarters level in Washington or in London, etc., and also on the ground. And as I said, European donors and Japanese ODA are somewhat different, but being different is not a bad thing because each of we can take off the each other's advantages. So we work collaboratively with other aid agencies as well. And thirdly, uh-huh. Okay, please explain how Japan identifies the need to provide a socio-economic or human resource capacity support for South Pacific countries. Well, this is, I think, asking Japan's policy vis-a-vis South Pacific countries. Um, may I invite Chief Representative Amaike to respond to this question? This question is asking what is the basic um, position and policy of Japan vis-a-vis South Pacific Island countries. Amaike-san, can you make an intervention? Or you can do it later.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Kato. I'm just checking the question. Thanks also for this. Please explain how
This is
Japan
Ashnil Kumar Singh.
is the
And
need to provide.
please explain how Japan identifies the need to provide a socio-economic or human resource capacity support. So what do you think are the major needs of socio-economic and human resource development in the South Pacific Island countries?
Thank you for the questions. The need in the South Pacific. In terms of the population, it's more in the Pacific countries, and then sometimes what we face as a development partner agency is that we always have. I feel that it's a challenge in that after we support someone's capacity development, and we provide a certificate, the person migrate to the other countries. And so we kind of keep, supporting the capacity development of staff members. And it's kind of difficult to see the exit of this issue, but still they're in need of supporting, I think, human development also. And In terms of education, well, if we take up the case of Fiji, the people in Fiji taking education in English, this is a great advantage for them. And then also, well, I think for them, I think they have the many relatives living in the Australia, New Zealand, or the US, and in a way, for them, all these countries are close to them, and to me, or what kind of living in Fiji, I feel that their living style are more kind of advanced, and how I see their needs. Well, I think there's still a lot of issues. What it says, socioeconomic, but also in terms of environment. Well, thanks to the Professor Kato chose the project of J Prism. Well, there is a solid waste management is always existing. The problem, the issues that South Pacific countries are facing, because we cannot burn, or there's a recyclable products, but the shipping out will cost, of course. And this kind of issues are always here. And then I'm hoping that the experience of Japan can support in a way to solve or maybe the betterment of the issue. So it's not the solid conclusion, but I would just like to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for dealing with this question. Although I didn't warn you beforehand that you may be asked to address a question. Okay, the first thing that Madam Maike mentioned is an issue of brain drain, right? And people migrate overseas, and once they obtain a higher education degree certificate, they never come back and remain outside, and that is a problem. And I think that there's a serious problem everywhere in the world. Well, anyway, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, please we'll invite you to come up with questions later once again. So let me move on. Okay, now to get back to the
I'm sorry, Professor Kato, just one very quick question from the audience here, please. Thank you.
okay, okay, go ahead.
Hi, Professor Kato. With the criteria about the importance of working together with countries on bilateral basis, how can our university USP, consisting of 12 countries, have access directly to Japan ODA instead of going through one country each?
Oh, again, I think Maike-san might be able to answer this question. That's a very interesting and important question. Maike-san, can you handle this question? Maike-san, are you there?
Professor Kato, just give us maybe a minute and we'll get back to that question shortly. Thank
Okay.
you.
Then let me move on with my presentation, and later she or someone else might get back to her question. Okay, how can single countries or USP can approach Japan, and not going through individual countries' diplomatic channel? Okay, now let me go back to my presentation. Okay, let's see. Now you now have my slide on the screen. Do you? Okay.
We can see it now.
Okay. Now, so far, I've been talking about the three key concepts of Japanese ODA: self-help support, emphasis on education, human resource development, and South-South cooperation. Okay, and so far we have seen how these principles are being applied to cooperation to the USP and other Pacific Island countries. This is what we have been covering so far. And the next question is why has Japan come to prioritize these principles, self-reliance, human resource development, and South-South cooperation? Why does Japan prefer to prioritize these principles? So that is the next question. And in order to answer this question, I'd like to go back to the historical experiences of Japan. So this is what I'm going to cover in the coming 20 minutes or so. Okay? So Japan's experience behind its ODA. You know, Japan is quite different from other donor countries, especially Europe and the US. They were already developed in the late 19th century, whereas Japan was uh, basically a backward agrarian country. So Japan was much poorer than European Western powers. And actually, this is the GDP per capita of Japan, which is shown by the red line, and the GDP per capita of the United States and the UK. If you look at the left-hand side of this graph, which is 1870, in the later half of the 19th century, Japan was far behind its European or Western counterparts. So Japan was very much poorer than European countries. And not only was Japan poorer than Western powers, it was also in a crisis. That is, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, it was an era of imperialism, and the whole world came under the colonial control of European powers. And when Japan opened its doors in the late 19th century, 1868 to be specific, it was an era of imperialism, and Japan had to remain its independence. And in order to remain independent, what do we have to do? That was the agenda of the major Meiji government leaders. So the only way for Japan to remain independent and to be respected by the Western powers is to develop its economy and secondarily to strengthen its military. Otherwise, you can easily be invaded and colonized by Western powers. So Japanese government did everything that they could do to strengthen its economy and as a result, its military. And after that, um, the World War II destroyed everything, and Japan had to start from scratch. And in order to be holding a respected position in the international community, of course, a country has to develop its economy and stand on its own feet. And that's what Japan did after the total defeat in World War II in 1945. So these experiences have taught us that in order for a country to remain independent, economic growth and economic self-reliance or economic takeoff is imperative, without which no country can remain independent. And that's why we also would like to urge our partner countries to independent economically, not too heavily dependent on foreign aid. And this idea was expressly declared in the ODA Charter, first published in 1992. One paragraph of that charter states that Japan attaches central importance to the support for the self-help efforts of developing countries towards economic takeoff. So these experiences starting in the late 19th century have taught us that if we are to help our partner countries with ODA should be aimed at supporting the country's effort to stand on their own feet. And the emphasis on education and human resource development, again, this is based on Japan's own developmental experiences. And we know that Japan was able to develop its economy rather rapidly like this. And thanks to the abundant human resources that was highly educated and well trained. Please have a look at this graph, which shows the primary school enrollment rate in Japan, in modern Japan. And as you can see, the Meiji Restoration took place in 1868. 1868. And immediately after that revolution took place, the Meiji, the new government, started to put in a lot of resources to expand its primary education system. And by the turn of the century, that means by around 1900, the primary school enrollment, both for boys and girls, came very close to 100%. Of course, girls' enrollment lagged behind that of boys, but still, there was no significant difference starting in the beginning of the 20th century. And we all know that Japan's rapid development was thanks to this abundant, well-educated, well-trained human resources. People say that Japanese development, after the Meiji Restoration is a miracle. And people also say that the recovery from the destruction of World War II was miraculous. But we see with abundant, well-trained, well-educated human resources, it is not a miraculous. It is, well, uh, not miraculous, not at all miraculous anyway. Okay, and actually, this kind of highly educated society did not begin in the late 19th century. Did not start with the modernization process. Actually, Japan was a very highly well-educated society even before the process of modernization started in the late 19th century. And here are some examples of how Japanese people were educated even during the feudal era. Edo period, that is the period preceding the Meiji era. It was Tokugawa shogunate, samurai's government, but even under the military rule, samurai warriors government, education was prioritized, and the government, Edo government, educated the warriors, and individual domain feudal lords established their own schools to educate their own soldiers. And even children of merchants and farmers were able to learn how to read and write and do arithmetics. They learned such things at private elementary schools called hirakoya. And all this background made it possible for Japan to rapidly improve its education system after the Meiji Restoration. So it is deeply in Japanese people's mind that no country can develop without education, without well-trained human resources. And we also believe that primary public education alone is not sufficient, and you have to have other types of education, and that is on-the-job training. And this is founder of Panasonic, Matsushita Konosuke, a very well-known and respected business person in Japan. And he says in his memoir, like this: you may be a well-educated, clever, and virtuous person, but those qualities will not necessarily make you a successful businessman. So no, so a PhD degree or master's degree does not guarantee you that you are a successful business person. You have to know how to solve problems, how to cooperate with your colleagues, and how to be punctual, how to discipline yourself. All these good qualities have to be with you if you are to be successful in business and anywhere actually. So we emphasize the human resource development based on the on-the-job training, as well as informal education like this. And actually, these, I think, what we have been doing with USP and J Prison, uh, exactly is something like this. We try to provide educational facilities simply because we want to provide you with spaces where human resources are developed and they learn how to solve problems with their own ideas. And finally, let's move on to the South-South cooperation. Yeah, as I promised, I'd like to talk a bit about the South-South cooperation model. And this is the model we have about how knowledge is created. It is important to learn external knowledge from abroad. So external knowledge is very important. But simply importing knowledge from abroad does not make you wiser and does not make your society more effective. You need to combine external knowledge with what you already have locally. So combining these two, external knowledge and local knowledge, you create something, and that is, in our case, called Japanization. And only when you create new knowledge with knowledge you already have, can you make, uh, you know, that knowledge truly yours. So by adapting external knowledge, you create a new prototype, which you will then be mainstreamed throughout the society. And this is what happened when we imported the technology from Europe. And if time allows, I'd like to show a video later. But to make a long story short, uh, cotton and silk industry were two major foreign exchange earners during the Meiji period. And those industries thrived, flourished, not simply because we imported developed technology from UK and France, but also we adapted their knowledge with local knowledge and created something new. And that made Japan a major exporter of cotton in the middle of the Meiji era. Okay, since time is running out, let me. Okay, another example of adapting knowledge is that um, Kaizen concept. The original idea of Kaizen was brought into Japan by an American expert, Mr. William Deming. And we imported this knowledge and methodology from the United States, but combining that methodology with what we have in Japan, the engineers in Toyota Motors and other companies have come up with the idea of Kaizen, which is related to the original idea brought forth by Mr. Deming, but different in a variety of ways. Kaizen is a system that will encourage the people in the factory, in the workplace, to come up with ideas to improve the productivity of the workplace. So, it is another example of knowledge adaptation and knowledge creation based on knowledge imported from overseas. Okay, so may I just share with you a short video explaining how um, this, let's see. Can you see it? Can everybody see it? Hello?
Yes, Professor Kato, we can see the video. Thank you.
As Japan modernized, it was cotton spinning that expanded most dramatically. This clearly exemplifies Japanese spirit, Western knowledge.
Professor Kato, please, can you kindly share your sound?
Okay, just a moment.
Thank you. The same way you did earlier.
Okay.
Thank you.
Up.
As Japan modernized, it was cotton
Professor Kato, that was perfect. We could hear you.
spinning that expanded most dramatically. This clearly exemplifies Japanese spirit, Western knowledge. We see the synthesis of Western and Japanese knowledge, Japanese-style continuous improvement and knowledge sharing via prototypes. In the 1880s, Japan was importing a lot of inexpensive but good quality cotton goods from the UK. To protect the domestic cotton spinning industry, the Japanese government plotted to turn the tables. The effort was spearheaded by Eiji Shibusawa. He saw an urgent need for new thinking and the latest cotton spinning technology from abroad. But Shibusawa also believed that simply copying imported foreign technology was undesirable. To understand spinning, you must do more than visit mills and read books. Once you learn the Western methods, you have to adapt them to suit Japan. Just using Western methods as they are will get you nowhere. Shibusawa felt that, rather than relying on foreign consultants, the top priority was for Japanese to build factories reflecting Japanese conditions. The man Shibusawa picked for the job was in England, studying economics at the University of London, Takeo Yamabe. Yamabe agreed with Shibusawa that it was essential to build a cotton spinning mill adapted to Japan. So he ended his studies and began visiting British cotton mills, looking for one that would hire him. He even placed ads in newspapers. But no factory was interested in a young man from an insignificant country in Asia. He was rejected again and again. Eventually, though, he found a mill willing to take him on as an ordinary laborer. Yamabe entered the factory with a clear, pragmatic purpose in mind. This was a way to acquire the know-how he needed to build a cotton mill adapted to Japan. While working at the factory as an ordinary laborer, not a student, he gradually translated into Japanese all the know-how needed to establish and run a mill. After returning to Japan, Yamabe imported state-of-the-art spinning machinery and steam engines. He used his experience to adapt the technology to Japanese conditions. He soon had a mill with tens of thousands of cotton reeling spindles. It was one of the world's largest. Yamabe understood the Japanese habit of diligence. He divided the workforce into 2 shifts and ran the mill 24 hours a day. For the night shift, he introduced the latest technology, electric lamps. Not even the English mills had this technology. Yamabe also succeeded in boosting international competitiveness. English cotton fibre was made from premium quality Egyptian raw cotton. To compete, Yamabe developed a technique for blending cheap cotton from India and other countries. Yamabe's innovation, cotton blended by nimble Japanese fingers, competed with British cotton in quality and price. The success of Yamabe's factory transformed attitudes. He had demonstrated that cotton spinning could be profitable, and soon large mills were being built all over Japan. Japanese blended cotton was well regarded. Japan eventually became the world's top exporter. Shibusawa knew that merely transferring alternative technologies from the West to Japan was a mistake. His clear aims and ambition helped new technologies to take root and new talent to grow.
Kato-san, please can you unmute your mic?
I'm sorry. Now let me wrap up. This is what we have been covering. First of all, I talked about a bit about ODA, what ODA is, and you must know at least some things about ODA. And we also talked about foreign aid can be harmful under certain conditions. And we also talked about the differences of among different donors. Not all donors are the same. And I highlighted 3 major characteristics of Japan's ODA. That is the emphasis on self-health support, human resource development, and indigenous knowledge utilization through South-South cooperation. And my final point was that these principles of Japan's ODA are rooted in Japan's own historical experiences. I'm sorry I have run out of time and we don't have any time for additional questions and answers, But if you have questions, please let me know, or you can get in touch with me directly through this email address or through JICA Fiji office. And uh, I think we have closing remarks of the Vice Chancellor of the University of South Pacific. So I must end my presentation at this moment. But anyhow, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kato-san, for that. I think we will accommodate the questions through question and answer sessions from Zoom, and if there are any from the audience here, then we'll try and get in touch with them to provide the best solutions and answers that we can. Now we've come to the end of this seminar, and I would like to invite Dr. Paunga to give his closing remarks here this afternoon. I'm sorry we have gone a bit overboard with our time. Please do apologize, Dr. Paunga, on that. Dr. Paunga is very well known at the USP, and currently he's a Deputy Vice Chancellor and Vice President for regional campuses, especially globally engagement. And one of the reasons why we invited him to give a closing remarks is Dr. Paunga himself has studied in Japan, and he can provide some insight. His experiences from while studying in Japan. And like how Professor Kato has mentioned, you can get your training in foreign countries, but how you adapt and tailor make it to work in your countries in the region is, I think, what Dr. Paunga can sort of elaborate on. And maybe he's doing that right now at USP. Yeah, so I invite Dr. Paunga to give his closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Professor Kato Hiroshi, representative of JICA, especially Ms. Amaike-san, and also the staff from the Embassy of Japan here in Fiji. Staff and students that are attending here physically, and also our friends that are present virtually, joining us not here physically, but they are all here. Just on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Paralwalia, who is operating from Samoa right now, Professor Kato, he's conveying his commendation to you, and also he really wishes to see you someday in the future. But on behalf of the everyone here, I think we are very thankful and honored with your lecture today, Professor. It's a very insightful lecture, and I think it's providing a lot of encouragement to each and every one of us here at the university. And as being introduced earlier by Jacob, I myself was one of those Pacific students that benefited from the love and the warm heart from the Japanese. I went there as a rugby player at Taito Punga University and ended up finishing my master's and my doctorate there in 1996. And I think one of the things that I was really, really interested in at the time was to see how Japan, what the process that you had just explained to us is exactly what is in the minds of us here in the Pacific, those of us that are starting to go further from high school up to universities and get the chance to continue. One thing that really strikes all of us in the Pacific, and I think it's not only among small island countries, but also globally, was the path and the journey that Japan took since the Meiji era, 1868, up to now. There was a big development, and we all witnessed the figures that you have provided. And I think at the same time, if we can just only take a shorter part, look at after the Second World War to how Japan was totally, had to start from scratch and become one of the major world power economic powers within 50 years old. It's something that is amazing to each and everyone. And I think that was one of the things that I was really honored to come and spend time with your Japanese for 7 years. and Japanese people over there, and I continue to work together when I was in government, and when I returned, continue to work together with JICA and also your embassies in Tonga and also here in Fiji and other Pacific Island countries. We also thank Samaike-san and representatives of JICA here in Fiji for cooperating with the International Office for making this seminar possible, especially the JICA chair. And we hope that we're going to continue this. This series of lectures and sharing. And I think today's topic was very appropriate and very relevant. Professor Kato, seeing the Japan as the biggest development partner here in Fiji, and probably one of the biggest among many of our island countries in the Pacific, it is very important to see your vision, how the Japanese, interpret your interpretation of what ODA is and international cooperation, and also the Japanese approach, not only how you see it from your point of view, but also in comparison to other development partners, whether it's Europeans or from Asia countries, other Asian countries, or the United States. And providing us with a historical background of why you're doing aid is something that we need to really take it to our hearts and learn from in terms of our cooperation between us students and also the Japanese government. Professor Sato, I think Japan has been a generous and a long-standing partner of the University of South Pacific in serving Pacific region, mainly in the areas of ICT, marines, agricultural researchers, and some of the key initiatives of the university are supported by Japan. You already mentioned in your presentation, including the USP Net 2000 funding model, the ICT for human development and human security. Also, we work together with Yoichi Sasakawa Young Leaders Fellowship Fund and Japan East Asia Network for Exchange for Students and Youth, which is known the Genesis Project. And we have seen the development on how not only that you have helped us develop in physical development, but going up to a stage now we are going big time. And I think one of the most popular exchange programs that we're having right now through the Genesis is all these cultural exchanges. And I think it is something very important that we take also, from your lecture and seeing the journey from the past to the present, becoming a world power and be able economic power, and also at the same time see how you assist weak or I would say vulnerable island countries like us here in the Pacific, unable to do much because due to resources and geographical distances. It's very important to work with you and see how you see things from your perspective. The construction of the where we are right now, Professor Kato, hopefully that you're going to join us and be here. And this is one of the most beautiful investment or places in Fiji, was that investment done by the Japanese government through the government of Fiji, with the Japan Pacific ICT Center. And that is something that we're really proud of. And it has a multi-purpose lecture theater, and which houses the state-of-the-art laboratories for students and staff. And I think those are the few things that we are very proud of here at the university due to that cooperation with Japan through JICA. After today's seminar, we are hopeful that the lessons on Japan, being the first modernized country from a non-Western background, while still being able to preserve their traditions, culture, and identity, will inspire our Pacific Island counterparts and encourage the audience to pursue opportunities offered through the JICA Chair program. Without further ado, with those few words, I really hope that we're going to meet again, Professor Kato, and also Maike-san with the various programs from JICA We need to learn more a little bit on that one. And again, I mean, the wonderful question that was asked by that young lady over there, I think she's so, passionate about how JICA and how the University of South Pacific can benefit more from the JICA project and the Japanese ODA. Because so far we have been going through, like with this beautiful, wonderful place over here, it has to be endorsed by the Fiji government in order to establish this. In order to go to other countries, we had to go individually with, to every country. But I think being a one-stop shop for the 12 countries, we are wondering how can we work together on trying to make sure that we can rightly and accountably able to implement Japanese projects in the future. Thank you very much, Professor Kato, and best to all of your family and your relatives and friends in Niigata. Hopefully one day you'll visit us here, or we're gonna, if you'll be late to come and see us here, we're gonna all try from USP to come and see you through our Genesis project. Okay, thank you very much. And Minakawakalev, Malapito, and Yoroshiku to you and everyone else. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Dr. Ponga, for those very wonderful words. And, you actually, nailed that question that, we really could not answer. But it definitely, through dialogue and consultations, I think there are possibilities to overcome that hurdle. And yeah, we welcome you to JICA Fiji office to have more discussions around, your question that you had raised, and we'll be able to and try our best to provide you with the best possible solution and work together to improve the whole USP community and the regional countries representing 12 countries in the region. Thank you, Professor Kato, for your time again, and very lovely to meet you again the second time, though virtually. And I do agree that yes, we need to meet some point in time in person. And all the best, and we'll keep in touch with you for future such seminars and other colleagues who are doing work around Japanese modernization in this new way that people can learn and probably adapt the way that Japan has become a very successful country in this world. Thank you very much, and I thank you all for coming here this afternoon. I know it has been quiet and wet here in Suva as usual, but please thank you very much for your participation, and also thanking all the participants who have joined virtually. Thank you for your time again. Binakawakalevu.